The heavyweight division is where punching power reaches its highest human limit. Whenever people talk about the monsters of the heavyweight division, 9 out of 10 fans think of Mike Tyson first. Fast, accurate, explosive. Opponents barely saw the punch coming before it was already on their face, and by the time they came back to their senses, the fight was over. But only the men who actually stood across from George Foreman understood that there is another kind of punching power that feels even more hopeless. You can see the shot coming. You know the right hand is on its way. You even bring both gloves high and try to shell up before it lands. But the moment it hits, the force still drives through the guard, through the arms, and into the skull, like being struck by the front of a train. The man who could throw that kind of punch was George Foreman. Two of the toughest men who ever pushed Muhammad Ali to the edge did not make it 4 full rounds combined against Foreman. Joe Frazier went 15 rounds with Ali and handed him the first loss of his professional career. Against Foreman, he was knocked down 6 times in less than 6 minutes, and one uppercut lifted the 200-plus pound champion off the canvas. Ken Norton was even harder. He fought Ali across 3 brutal fights, and in their first meeting, he famously broke Ali's jaw. But when Foreman trapped him near the ropes, defense stopped mattering. In that era, people were not really asking whether Foreman could win. They were asking how many minutes his opponent could last. At 24, he knocked Frazier down 6 times in less than 2 rounds and became heavyweight champion of the world. At 45, long after his hand speed, legs, and gas tank had faded, he used one short right hand to knock out a reigning champion 19 years younger than him. That was George Foreman. Power without decoration, simple force refined into its highest form. But today, this story is not only about how hard Foreman could punch, it is about a stranger question. How could the same pair of fists that once nearly destroyed him become the very thing that carried him back to the top of the heavyweight world 20 years later? Before we go deeper, make sure to subscribe to Fight Epoch. We tell the stories behind the fights, the damage, the rivalries, the turning points, and the moments the official record never fully explains. George Foreman was born in Texas and grew up in Houston's 5th Ward, a place where poverty, street trouble, and violence were never far away. Young Foreman was nothing like the smiling, gentle, older man millions later saw on television. He was angry, rough, and dangerous. He used his fists to bury the shame that poverty had placed inside him. Some people walked around trouble. Foreman walked straight into it. Only when he knocked someone else down did he feel, even for a moment, that he was not the poor kid with life pressing a foot against his neck. Then, as a teenager, under the guidance of Coach Doc Broaddus, he found boxing. For the first time, Foreman discovered a place where the world would actually applaud his anger. Fighting in the street could send him to jail. Fighting in the ring could send him to a podium. But there was a problem. Anger can turn a man into a monster very quickly. It does not teach that monster how to become a real champion. At the time, nobody could see that danger clearly. Foreman could not see it either. His boxing education was shockingly short. The 1968 Mexico City Olympics were already close. Other fighters had trained for years just to chase qualification. Foreman arrived almost like a late student walking into an exam room, and with 2 unreasonable fists, he punched his way to the final. At 19, George Foreman won Olympic heavyweight gold. His technique was not refined. His experience was limited. But what did that matter if many opponents never got the chance to use their technique before the fight was already over? That success pushed Foreman toward a dangerous belief. If one punch could not solve the problem, another one would. Years later, Muhammad Ali would seize on exactly that belief and make the seemingly unstoppable Foreman taste defeat. But before that night, nobody in the heavyweight division seemed able to withstand the anger in Foreman's hands. Foreman's power was not the wide, looping power of an ordinary slugger. He often reached out first with those thick forearms, pushed an opponent's guard out of position, controlled the shoulder, disrupted the balance, and then dropped punches from a distance so close that most fighters could not fully load their punches. It was not beautiful boxing, but it was brutally effective. He did not even need to land perfectly on the chin. If he hit the gloves, those gloves would be driven back into the opponent's face. If he hit the shoulder, the whole arm could feel dead. If he hit the body, the ribs and organs seemed to seize up together. Most punchers look for openings in the defense. Foreman often smashed the man and the defense at the same time. That was the most domineering part of his style. Once he got close and started breaking the guard, falling felt like only a matter of time. In the first 40 fights of his professional career, Foreman went 40-0, with 37 wins inside the distance. But the fight that truly terrified the world was his meeting with Joe Frazier. At the time, Frazier was the undefeated heavyweight champion, the Iron Man who had beaten Ali in the fight of the century. His bob and weave rhythm, left hook, and suffocating pressure could drag any puncher into the kind of pocket fight they hated. Before the fight, many people believed Foreman was too inexperienced and that Frazier would be the man to expose him. In the first round, Foreman landed an uppercut that seemed to lift Frazier off the floor. This was not just a retreat, it was not a stumble. It looked as if someone had shoved an iron shovel under a 200-pound champion and thrown him upward.
His trainer right next to me is saying it. You may hear him. Down goes Frazier!
Frazier got up and came forward again. Then he got knocked down again. He rose and he fell. The fight turned into a brutal loop. 6 knockdowns in less than 2 rounds.
Is going about his job. Foreman is all over Joe Frazier. Frazier is down. Now the round is about to end. 2 knockdowns in the first round of Joe Frazier. Down again. No safer cannon. Oh, he is all over Frazier again. He has Frazier in the corner. Frazier's knees buckled. He is down. He is down. In the Mexico City arena. A quick left from George. Another. Frazier is down for Foreman. It is target practice. Frazier is ready to go again. Joe is standing. There he goes. 3 times.
The same man who had fought Ali for 15 rounds and handed him the first loss of his career suddenly looked breakable in front of Foreman. But while the world was stunned by the destruction, Ali saw the weakness inside Foreman's greatest weapon. He relied so much on his own power that if he believed the next punch would end the fight, he would keep throwing until his gas tank ran dry. The idea sounded simple. The real question was much harder. Who would dare use his own body to test it? 1 year later, Ken Norton could not give that answer either. Norton had broken Ali's jaw and fought him across 3 hard fights, but against Foreman, he also failed to get out of the second round. Foreman used his forearms to frame and shove Norton toward the ropes, then punched through and around the guard until the defense fell apart. Norton was not simply failing to defend. Every time he blocked, his body lost a little more strength. By the time the final heavy shot landed, he was still standing, but his eyes had already emptied out. His legs were still under him, but his brain seemed to disconnect first.
Oh, good right hand on the left-hand side of the face of Norton. Norton is a bit stunned as Foreman is teeing off, and it looks like Norton has really been 7, 8, and here we go as Foreman comes banging on in the second round. Norton goes down again, a left hand on the side of the head. No, he doesn't. His legs are rubbery as the left hand goes to the side of his head. A right uppercut, a left jab, and a vicious left sends Norton crumbling to the canvas.
One man had beaten Ali, the other had broken Ali's jaw. Together, they did not last 4 full rounds with Foreman. So before the fight in Zaire, the world was no longer asking whether Ali could win. It was asking how many minutes he could survive. Only Ali understood the truth. If you crash straight into this mountain, you get crushed. If you want the mountain to fall, you have to make it collapse from the inside. That was why the rumble in the jungle became more than a fight. It became one of the greatest displays of boxing IQ the sport has ever seen. When the fight began, Ali did something almost nobody understood. He put away the floating footwork that had made him famous, backed himself toward the ropes, raised a high guard, and let Foreman punch. Punch after punch crashed into Ali's arms, shoulders, body, and the ropes behind him. People at ringside screamed for him to get off the ropes, but Ali did not leave. He tied up Foreman's arms, leaned on him in the clinch, and whispered poison into his ear. "Is that all you've got? Is that all the power you have?" Against another fighter, those words might have been ordinary trash talk. Against Foreman, they were like a match dropped into a powder keg. In the past, when Foreman felt an opponent weakening, one more burst of violence was usually enough to end the night. But now, every time Ali took punishment, the voice got louder. Foreman believed he was always one clean shot away. Just a little harder, just one more punch, Ali would finally fall.
Anything of ugliness you can think of.
Indians get talk. Definitely serious. Tremendous combination.
He fought just like your initial bum, just lay on the rope and take a whipping. This time he did it with character. He said, I'm going to weather the storm.
The rope-a-dope was invented by Muhammad Ali that night.
I must say, I don't understand those tactics, Joe, staying on the ropes.
I mean, a knockout on him. He stood up to me.
Foreman setting him up against the rope. Look at him whispering in the ear of Foreman.
George, so strong.
Not supposed to do, leaning up against the rope. 4 punches downstairs on Ali.
So fearless.
I had him beat. I really did.
But Ali was never really attacking Foreman's chin. He was attacking Foreman's personality. The harder Foreman swung, the more broken his breathing became. The more urgent he grew, the looser his technique became. Those heavy shots landing on arms, shoulders, elbows, and ropes looked like waves crashing against a wall, but punch by punch, Foreman was spending himself. By the 8th round, the man who once pushed forward like a bulldozer was visibly tired. Ali suddenly came off the ropes and fired a sharp combination straight down the middle. For the first time, the monster who had lifted Frazier off the canvas felt helpless. He fell straight to the floor.
Ali to let the man punch himself out. 30 seconds left in round 8. Very even fight. Ali, a sneaky right hand. Another sneaky right hand. This time he works over the shoulder of Foreman.
That loss took more than the championship belt. It broke the thing Foreman believed in most. He had always thought that if the power was great enough, there was no opponent it could not solve. Ali spent 8 rounds proving that when a man has nothing left but force, that force can become a weapon for the opponent. But Foreman did not wake up immediately. After the loss, he did not become humble. He became angry and full of excuses. He blamed his trainers. He blamed the water. He blamed almost everyone around him, but he refused to admit that Ali had completely read him. His next great war, against Ron Lyle, barely looked like a controlled boxing match. It looked like 2 smoking machines trying to find out which one would break down first. Lyle's heavy punches put Foreman down. Foreman got up and knocked Lyle down in return. Both men abandoned defense. Whoever was a little more conscious threw the next bomb. Foreman later described Lyle's punches as something that did not merely hurt, but seemed to disconnect his brain from his legs.
Feel it until I hit the canvas.
Foreman is down! It started with a right, then a left. Now Foreman fighting back. Foreman trying to hold together. Now George struck back. Now George fought back.
You said some punches are so ferocious that they don't hurt. They actually will interrupt communication between the tower and the ground.
Foreman goes down. Foreman goes down. Now Lyle is hurt. Now Lyle is... What an incredible fight. Utterly without boxing skill. Just punching away. Each fighter.
Foreman eventually won that firefight in the 5th round, but the rematch with Ali that he wanted most never came.
This time it may be over. This time it may be over.
He beat Frazier again, and still the chance to avenge the Ali loss did not arrive. Revenge became a hook in his chest. The more he struggled, the deeper it dug in. Then, in 1977, after losing to Jimmy Young, Foreman suffered a terrifying episode in the dressing room. The feeling of being close to death changed him. The man who had lifted Frazier off the floor, the man who once carried such violent intent into the ring, felt real fear. Not fear of another man's punches, but fear that he might never wake up again. After that night, he turned toward religion. Then he left boxing for 10 full years. He became a preacher. He built a youth center. He put away the snarl, learned to smile, and eventually learned to admit that the younger George Foreman had been a very difficult man. The strange part was this: when the anger left him, the power did not leave with it. 10 years later, Foreman suddenly announced his comeback. He was nearly 40. His weight had climbed past 300 pounds at one point. His feet were slower than before, and his belly was impossible to miss. The media said he needed money. Fans said he was crazy. Even his wife worried that younger fighters might get him badly hurt. But the outside world did not fully understand what was driving him. Foreman did not put the gloves back on, only because he missed being champion. His youth center was struggling, and children who relied on it were close to losing that safe place. The man who once made money through fighting had to return to boxing to protect something bigger than himself. At first, everyone treated him like a joke, but once the first opponents actually felt his punches, the laughter disappeared quickly. The older Foreman no longer chased people down in a fury like the younger version had done. He walked slowly, but his lead hand kept touching, posting, pawing, and crowding the opponent's guard. He looked like an old bear that had learned how to move men exactly where he wanted them. He could lose exchanges. He could let younger fighters take early rounds, because he finally understood something. True power does not need to win every second of a fight. It only has to appear once in the right place. Young Foreman chased opportunities with his strength. Old Foreman forced opponents to give him the opening. At 42, when Foreman challenged Evander Holyfield, most of the world still for him. Before Holyfield, people watched because they wanted to see when the old fat man would finally fall. After that night, they realized this old fat man might actually be capable of fighting for the championship again. 3 years later, the answer finally arrived. At 45, Foreman challenged 26-year-old Michael Moorer. Moorer was an undefeated champion. He was faster, sharper, and most importantly, 19 years younger. For 9 rounds, Foreman spent most of the fight being outboxed. Champion 19 years younger, and became the oldest heavyweight champion in boxing history at the time. Moorer was the man who fell, but what Foreman truly buried was the night in Zaire that had haunted him for 2 decades. Looking back now, the scariest thing about Foreman was never only how hard he punched. Tyson's power came from speed, angle, and explosion all igniting in the same second. Foreman's power felt more like the Earth's crust buried under your feet. In his youth, it could lift champions off the ground. At 45, it could still make the entire heavyweight division tremble. But the real evolution was never in the fist. It was in the man throwing the punch. When Foreman was young, every punch was an attempt to prove something to the world. That was why Ali could beat him by forcing him to keep proving it. When Foreman was older, he no longer needed to intimidate anyone in a hurry. He could wait 9 rounds for one real punch. The force that once destroyed him was uncontrolled power. 20 years later, the thing that saved him was the man who had finally learned to control it. So who hit harder, George Foreman or Mike Tyson? Maybe there will never be a perfect answer. But if the question is, whose single punch felt most like an unavoidable natural disaster, whose fist could still punch through an era 20 years after his youth was gone, it is almost impossible to avoid George Foreman. Tyson's punch was terrifying because you often could not see it. Foreman's punch was terrifying because you could see it, brace for it, and still could not stop it. Thank you for watching this episode of Fight Epoch. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and we will see you in the next one.